to be with you. I'm Katie Tur. George Santos is once again a free man, at least for now. After being arrested this morning, the GOP congressman from Long Island was arraigned in a Suffolk County courtroom and then released on a $500,000 bond. Santos pleaded not guilty, and he says he'll hold a news conference to address the charges. We're watching and waiting for that, and we'll go there once it begins. But federal prosecutors argue he is guilty. They say Santos is a liar and a cheat, and that they've got the goods to prove it. In the 13-count indictment unsealed today, the feds charged him with wire fraud and money laundering, stealing public funds, and lying to the House of Representatives. All told, George Santos could be facing many years in prison, not to mention the loss of his congressional seat. Eventually, the GOP Speaker of the House, with his 4-vote margin over the Democrats, needs Santos on the floor. So Kevin McCarthy told reporters today, let him have his day in court.
Adam Reese said, when asked how he pleaded,
Rahima, let me just interrupt you for 1 second, because we're looking at a live picture of reporters running up to George Santos, where I think he's going to be addressing the cameras. We're going to listen for just a second. Everyone hold on.
There is a podium over there for you. Can you please go to it? Let him go. Let him move. Let him go. Beautiful. Make a hole so he can get through. Make a hole. Make a hole. Make a hole. Watch your step. Watch your fall. You're gonna fall. You're gonna fall. Watch your step. Watch your step. Here we go. Down. How are you feeling? Come on. Come on. Come on. There's a mic stand back there by the car. Right, that's good. Your colleagues are making it difficult. Come on.
What you're watching right now is the assembled press from New York and frankly all over the country, perhaps other parts of the world, trying to navigate all at once to get George Santos to the podium, where there are a number of microphones placed that are connected to the cameras that we're seeing, so we can actually hear what he's saying. So work with us as George Santos does a penguin walk toward that microphone stand. It should be but a few more seconds, hopefully, if these reporters move out of the way. Let's listen. We can hear a little bit.
These words are like crying.
I see you there, Joy. Joy, what's going on here? Did you raise money for a
All right, let me just add. George Santos had a indictment unsealed against him. It was 20 pages, 13 counts in it, multiple counts of wire fraud, 7 counts of wire fraud, I should say, 3 counts of money laundering, 1 count of theft of public funds. That's for taking unemployment benefits when he was not unemployed. He was making $120,000 a year from a Florida investment bank, and 2 counts of materially making false statements to the House of Representatives. In the indictment, the U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of New York wrote he used political contributions to line his pockets, soliciting at least $50,000 from donors to a fake super PAC and then using that money for personal debts and expenses, including luxury goods and designer clothing. I think we can hear now. Let's listen.
Yeah, you guys let them go to the podium. Let's go to the podium. Make a hole. Make a hole.
Look, if you guys don't behave, there's no way you're going to get information back to the people. So if you make way and act like, civilized people, I know you all are. I know a lot of you by first name. We talk all the time. Let's get to the podium, make some space, and then we'll address. If you all agree, make some space.
George Santos sounding like the voice of reason there to the gathered press. Please move out of the way so I can get to the podium and then I will speak to you, he says. It looks like that is now finally happening. So again, prosecutors say he unlawfully applied for unemployment benefits that should have gone to New Yorkers who lost their jobs in the pandemic. They also allege $24,000 he was taking in when he was actually making, as I said, $120,000 from a Florida investment company. Intriguingly, what the indictment leaves hanging is where all the money that he says he personally donated to his campaign came from his own bank account. He says it came from his own bank account. Prosecutors say these assertions were false, that he didn't have a $750,000 salary from the DeVolder organization, which, by the way, is his last name, and he did not have between $1 and $5 million in dividends. Again, these assertions were false. He didn't have that money. So we are left asking, what else might prosecutors have on George Santos, George DeVolder, as he's also known, that they haven't yet revealed to us? Okay, let's listen.
To address and defend myself. We have an indictment. We have the information that the government wants to come after me on, and I'm going to comply. I've been complying throughout this entire process. I have no desire not to comply at this point. They've been gracious in there. Now I'm going to have to go and fight to defend myself. The reality is it's a witch hunt, because it makes no sense that in 4 months, 5 months, I'm indicted. You have Joe Biden's entire family receiving deposits from nine family members receiving money from foreign destinations into their bank accounts. It's been years of exposing. A lot of you here have reported on them, and yet no investigation is launched into them. I'm gonna fight. I'm getting back to that. I'm gonna fight my battle. I'm gonna deliver. I'm gonna fight the witch hunt. I'm gonna take care of clearing my name, and I look forward to doing that.
Congressman, did you take
Hold on.
What do you say to that?
I would like the opportunity for some of you guys to ask some questions in an orderly fashion, and we'll start right here. Go ahead, Rachel.
Why would you apply for unemployment benefits when you had a job making $120,000 a year?
Rachel, this is part of my defense. This is inaccurate information, and I will get to clear my name on this. During the pandemic, it wasn't very clear. I don't understand where the government's getting their information, but I will present my facts.
Prosecutors say that you got over $20,000 in unemployment benefits, sir. How is that acceptable?
Ma'am, like I said, my employment was changed during the time. I don't understand where the government's coming from. I'll present my defense.
And one last
What evidence do you have that they don't have? Because it's extensive.
I have plenty of evidence that we will now be sharing with the government in this case to make sure that I can defend myself.
Congressman,
are you planning on running for re-election?
Yes, I am.
Do you
And
think you'll
why
win
should
re-election?
anybody believe you now?
Well, like I said, I will prove myself innocent, and then we'll move from there.
Congressman, did you take?
Our time away.
I'm sorry for blocking. The $750,000, they said that you reported that wrongly. Do you have any comment to that?
Well, like I said, I will be giving them all, will be delivering all the finances of my company, delivering all my finances to them to dispel their accusation.
Congressman,
against me.
And again, you will not resign.
I will not resign.
Congressman, did you take campaign donations and use that money to buy expensive suits?
No, I did not.
Do you think you'll win re-election?
That's not up for me to know. Elections are very tricky, and it's up to the people. I trust them to decide what's best for them.
Congressman, you did it lying in the past. What do you think will make people believe you this time around?
Oh, look, like I said, I've asked many times. I want to be judged by the work I do in the body, and I stay committed to that.
Washington now.
Yes, I am. I have to go back and vote. Tomorrow we have one of those consequential votes in this Congress, which is a border bill, and I'm very looking forward to being there to vote on it.
Right now.
Well, I'm not going to address just the speaker. I'll address leadership. I appreciate everybody's patience with my presence in Congress. As you know, the media has its ways of doing things, and I respect you guys. I've maintained good rapport with a lot of you guys. I've spoken with a lot of you guys, and I have the intention to continuing that open door. Some of you who are from the Hill know how to find me. Some of you here from the district don't have a hard time finding me. It's about keeping in line of communication. So I appreciate leadership for being patient at this time and for allowing the process to play out. I think this is about innocent until proven guilty. This starts. I have my right to fight to prove my innocence, as the government has the right to fight to try to find me guilty in whatever charges.
You haven't shown them documents to prove your innocence until now, because you're being accused for a long time.
Well, because the media is not jury or the judge, so I will present that to the jurors and to the judge in this courthouse.
And to the Congress.
Well, if Congress requests it, I will present it to them as well.
So are you
negotiate a plea?
I'm feeling, look, it's hard.
Look at the desk, thank you.
I'm addressing one of your colleagues here. I don't want to give the back of.
You're the camera.
So, as usual, Jody, I do my best to be a positive person. Life is already as bad as it gets out there. So I'm fine. I'm good. I believe I'm innocent.
How can you defend yourself with so many investigations and accusations?
Well, look, the way I look at it, I'll be a chairman of a committee in a couple of years if you just look at the standards of Congress. Look at the Senate.
COVID money, yet you're being alleged that.
Well, it's alleged, right? So are you accusing me, or are you going to allow the process to play itself and allow me to clear my name? That's my question.
But Congressman, did you ever accept any unemployment money?
About the charges against you, and also can you talk about the process of surrendering being arrested?
No, it was very amicable, very peaceful. These guys did a phenomenal job. We clearly came right under your noses, and you didn't see us come in today. And now we're leaving. Obviously, we're addressing you guys. Had all the intention of the world to be out here with you guys. I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep fighting for what I believe in. I'm going to keep fighting to represent my district. I'm going to keep fighting to deliver results. And now I have to keep fighting to deliver, to defend my innocence. And I'm going to do that.
Did you ever accept any unemployment money?
Governor Hochul today said you should resign and put your district out of its misery. Will you do that?
Governor Hochul is entitled to her opinion. I don't represent her. She is not my constituent. So.
I saw your face before today. I saw your face before today. I saw your face. You looked.
Go ahead.
You looked pretty stressed. When I saw you sit down and the judge first started speaking, what was going through your mind? What are you feeling after being in court today?
Well, when it's your first time in experiencing something of this nature, I think everybody would show some kind of stress, right? I quite frankly don't believe I was stressed. I did the best I could to just keep my composure. I was fine. But again, this has been an experience, for a book or something like that. So anyway, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you guys. Here's what we'll do. I will, guys. I will. You see. That is information you'll never get, because that is the media's. Your intention is to go harass them and make their life miserable. You're not getting that. All right,
George, where's your husband?
It's not often you're left speechless in this job. After all, it is my job to speak, but that kind of leaves you speechless. He says he'll be a chairman of a committee in a couple of years if you look at the standards of Congress. He says this experience could be experience for a book that he might write, okay? He also says he'll comply and that he will defend himself, that these allegations are false, and that he has the evidence to prove they're false.
But we have the charges on the screen. Andrew Weissman, 7 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of money laundering, 1 count of theft of public funds, 2 counts that relate to what Grace is describing, false statements to the House of Representatives. These were some of his financial disclosures. And I want to read something from the indictment, laying out what is described repeatedly in the indictment as a scheme. On or about October 21st, 2022, DeVolder Santos sent to contributor 2 one or more text messages in which DeVolder Santos reiterated the need for contributions to Company 1, which he falsely stated would be spent on ads. That same day, in reliance upon the email and accompanying text messages, contributor 2 caused a sum of $25,000 to be wired to company 1. From there, the funds received from contributor 1 and contributor 2 were spent by Santos for his personal benefit, including to make cash withdrawals, personal purchases of luxury clothing, credit card payments, a car payment, payments on personal debts, and one or more bank transfers to DeVolder Santos's personal associates. Anyone that watches, Law and Order knows that those are crimes that a lot of people don't get away with. What is your assessment of sort of the scale of criminality revealed in the indictment?
Well, you really have these three different types of schemes. And one of the things that the government, I think, did very well is rely on hard evidence. And what I mean by that is not just what witnesses appear to say, but emails and texts, which they quote from, that include emails and texts from George DeVolder Santos. So what you were reading from, Nicole, was one of the schemes involves lying to two campaign contributors. There may be more, but at least two are identified, not by name, but as two contributors who were told, very much like the Steve Bannon Wall prosecution, they were told, please contribute money to my campaign and the money will go to only campaign uses. And in fact, as you just noted, the indictment says that it didn't go to that. It went to all sorts of personal items like luxury goods and clothing and things of that ilk. So it is very much tracking the kind of charges which were successful against Steve Bannon and his conspirators involving soliciting money for the wall, saying all of this money will go to building a wall when in fact it was going to lining their own pockets. So that's one aspect of and what a huge part of this scheme, but it's only one of three schemes that are charged in this indictment.
Take us through the others, Andrew.
Sure. So the other, as was mentioned, has to do with false filings with the House. So as you said, it's not a crime, unfortunately, to lie to the public. It's viewed that that's a political issue, that people can see through that and can decide how to vote or not. But these were filings that were made to the House about his finances and what he had in his accounts or didn't have. And so that forms a second bucket. And the third bucket may be sort of the most sort of outrageous in some ways, because it was not just seeking unemployment, which to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars, but also COVID relief, which was for people who, and like small businesses, where he lied about that to get, according to the charges, in order to get this additional funding. So again, a third way in which false statements can actually be charged. And I should point out to your point about Kevin McCarthy, all of this does not have to await the House waiting for the end of the criminal case. They have an ethics committee. They have the ability to ask a sitting member of the House questions about all of these allegations and to get at the truth. So they don't have to wait for Judge Seibert to schedule a trial and to see if there's conviction. They can actually get those answers from George Santos now. There's a reason they're not doing it, which is political. It's not because of anything that's preventing them from having those conversations with somebody who, just to be clear, George Santos is now voting on things for the American public, even though he is facing 13 extremely serious federal felony charges carrying. He cannot live the length of time if you were to add up all of the crimes that he's convicted of them. It is a really serious set of charges here.
Michael Steele, George Santos, and I remember reading Grace and her colleagues' early stories, didn't seem real. He seemed like he was made in a laboratory to answer this question: how bad is the GOP? They're so bad that they're going to hang on to a guy who lies about, and we tried to just spitball and come up with the list. Lies told by George Santos that he's Jewish, that he had 2 knee replacements from playing volleyball too well or too hard, that he attended Horace Mann, where he went to college, the MBA that he doesn't have, where he worked. that he had employees who died in the Pulse nightclub shooting, that his mother was in the South Tower on 9/11. This was the one that offended me the most. I think I lived with it one day, that he raised funds for surgery for a dog that he never provided the dog's owner with. That dog ended up dying. Lies about his life in Brazil. I mean, he seemed too awful to be real, but he answered the question of, does Kevin McCarthy have a red line? No.
Well, he doesn't have a red line because George Santos has something that he values more than the integrity of this process and what it means for the party and how it plays out, and that's a vote. When you only have a 4-seat majority, losing a vote, having a special election in a district that could likely yield a Democrat coming to Congress, you're going to pretend that the stain isn't there. You're going to dance and waffle around it. You're going to try your best to ignore it because you need that vote. So don't expect Kevin McCarthy to do anything different than he's done up till now, because with questions coming before the House related to the debt and other big things that the Republicans want to try to get in front of the American people, they're going to need that vote. So that's the politics of this. The underlying backstory is the story of a guy who is at once and always looking to be the center of attention. That scrum that we saw coming into this conversation with the press is a moment very much like Donald Trump. He loves this. And, so the reporter's like, I saw the worried look on your face. Oh, you noticed that? Oh, you noticed that I was worried? No, I really wasn't worried. Pshaw, right? It's all drama. And what was his response at the end of that? Oh, this is something that I could probably write a book about. Folks, you're watching the grift live on television. And our press, they're suckers for it every time. They create the drama and the atmosphere. Man, if there was just one pool reporter there waiting to get a statement from DeSanto, whatever his name is, George Santos, right? The reality would have been very different. The responses would have been very different.
Let me respectfully push back. I mean, it is the journalism of Grace and her colleagues that brought the story to bear. But I take your point about the circus today. And I guess I would go even further by saying, to Andrew Weissman's point, he has a vote. I mean, here's what he's done with it. He has voted with Marjorie Taylor Greene. He's co-sponsoring a bill that could ban LGBTQ books in classrooms. Politico reported that he leans on groups with white nationalist ties. CBS News reported that he backs a bill to make AR-15 rifles the national gun of the United States. I mean, he's also there enjoying, relishing, creating, I would say, I agree with you, Michael, the circus, and doing great harm. What do we, we had a lot of conversations about the rule of law. It moved quite quickly in this instance, but, to the point that everyone's making, he's still there. He's still a member in good standing.
Well, he's a member in standing. I don't know how good it is. The reality of it is, to the extent that it is good, it's because the leadership allows him to participate the way he does. He can still vote when a vote is called. And again, that goes back to the point I was making. He doesn't have committee assignments. He's not having that level of impact on the workings of the Congress or on bills that come before committees. But it does speak more broadly to how we get caught up in the circus. And that's really my only point about how this press avail came about. When someone like George Santos is like, everybody calm down, just let me get to the podium, right? It's like, I want to give you the information, just let me do it. It just speaks to how these things quickly escalate into a circus atmosphere. And that plays to the underlying narrative. At the end of the day, this is going to be a book that he wants to write, that he wants to make money off of, that regardless of what the outcome here is, he's going to get paid. There is going to be an upside for him. And all of the criminal justice elements that my buddy Andrew is laying out and all the great reporting that is done on this doesn't take away that fact. That's the end game here.
Well,
That
and
is
Michael,
always the end.
but to button that, I mean, that is because one of the country's two parties, the one we were in, is broken. I mean, a healthy, functioning party, you know, expels the cancer from the body
I would have dismissed them a long
politic.
time ago.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Be gone by now. Yeah.
Right. I want to show you, Grace, what felt like a turning point in this story. It happened pretty early, and that was a divide in the Republican caucus. These are the Republican members from New York who wanted him out. Let me show you that.
Well, there's a clock ticking, and George Santos should have resigned in December. He should have resigned in January. He should have resigned yesterday, and maybe he'll resign today. But sooner or later, honesty and justice will be delivered to him.
He should resign. I've said that repeatedly, and obviously these charges confirm what I've said from the beginning.
Why do you think the speaker doesn't follow that same posture?
I'll leave it to others to, discuss their position on it, but the bottom line is his conduct has been embarrassing and disgraceful. And he should resign as a member of Congress.
Now, Grace, that was from yesterday, but that wasn't the first time these members have spoken out against him. Talk about the complicated New York politics and why some Republicans from New York distance themselves from him.
Yeah, this is one of, as you've sort of mentioned, one of the more interesting developments that occurred pretty quickly. Some of the loudest voices on the Republican side are coming from representatives who are, right near him in Long Island, local leaders, Joe Cairo, who's the chairman of the Nassau County GOP, very, very early gathered a press conference and, made very clear their stance, calling upon him to resign. Those calls have continued. They have been, resolute in those, and they've said that they will not, work with him on any legislation, even though some of them actually share many similar priorities. I believe there's two different bills. George Santos has one, and his colleague has another on the SALT deduction that it kind of burdens many high-income states, including New York, and including many voters on Long Island. But those congressmen have sort of stood very clear and said they will not work with him. And you have heard that echoed by other freshman GOP members who you have not heard it from, as you mentioned, obviously, is real leadership, Kevin McCarthy, and notably here in New York, Elise Stefanik.
Yes, so much more to say about that with you, Michael Steele. Grace, we know you're covering the story. You pulled over and stopped to be part of our coverage. We want to let you go, but not without, again, tipping our hat to the incredible dogged reporting. I think it was over the holidays that we first started paying real close attention to the stories that were breaking about this brand new member named George Santos. So congrats to you and your colleagues, Grace, and thank you for being here with us.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me from my car.
Thank you. All right, when we come back, our next guest says George Santos is not an outlier in the Republican Party. He's the natural outgrowth of a Republican Party that has allowed itself to be led by an extremist leader. A twice impeached, indicted, now liable for sexual abuse and defaming ex-president. Congressman Richie Torres, who's been sounding the alarms about Santos for months now, joins us next. Plus,
and for clowns and crooks and charlatans and conspiratorial crackpots. It's a real indictment of how far we have fallen as a country.
Yeah,
More shocking.
Ana Cabrera reports, weekday mornings at 10 on MSNBC.
joining our conversation, Democratic Congressman Richie Torres of New York. He, along with fellow New York Congressman Dan Goldman, filed an official House ethics complaint against George Santos back in January. I remember the day that the video broke of you and Congressman Goldman dropping it off in his office. Your reaction to today's 13 charges from DOJ?
Well, more shocking than the 13 charges is George Santos' reaction. I mean, he has delusions of grandeur that staggers the mind. I mean, Mr. Santos has the chutzpah to claim that he's the victim of the witch hunt. Never mind that he stole and defrauded and lied and laundered money. You know, it's so obvious that he has a shamelessness matched only by Donald Trump. And for me, fraudulent figures like Donald Trump and George Santos are symptoms of a diseased Republican Party that has become a safe haven for clowns and crooks and charlatans and conspiratorial crackpots. It's a real indictment of how far we have fallen as a country.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the more chilling part of the story, right? That the contagion of Trump's animosity toward the rule of law in America has spread to New York, to George Santos. I wonder if you think that Elise Stefanik and Kevin McCarthy are to blame for that.
Well, House Republican leadership has a clear choice, right? Either expel George Santos or become his enabler. Right? There are only two morally acceptable outcomes. Either George Santos resigns or Republicans expel him. And the refusal to expel George Santos is clearly driven not by principle, but by power and politics. The worst kept secret in Washington, D.C. is that House Republican leadership needs George Santos.
Right.
Kevin McCarthy needs every vote he can get, and he needs George Santos. And notice that Mr. Santos was the decisive vote on the bill to default on America.
Right. I mean, it is this sort of toxic and dysfunctional codependence between Kevin McCarthy and George Santos. And I wonder if you can speak more to the success that you and your colleagues have had in raising this issue of I mean, it's much more than a lack of ethics. It's flagrant criminal conduct. And to see a couple of the crimes charged, there were so many, but a couple of them were squarely in this category of lying and therefore damaging, lying to and lying on his background forms in the House of Representatives. It feels like that shouldn't be a partisan reaction to the sanctity and importance of truthfully filling out background forms and disclosures.
Look, my colleague Dan Goldman and I certainly played a role in shining a spotlight on the corruption of George Santos, but the person who deserves the most credit is Mr. Santos himself. I mean, when you pretend to be a gay, biracial, Ukrainian, Belgian, Brazilian, Jewish, Broadway producer and Wall Street banker, you're bound to attract scrutiny. And so, for me, the life story of George Santos is the greatest fiction in the history of congressional politics. And he's a deep rot at the core of Congress as an institution. In a country of 330 million people, only 535 get the honor of serving in Congress. One of them should not be George Santos. It's an embarrassment to this country that he's a member of Congress. And one of our responsibilities is oversight. We oversee programs like the unemployment insurance program, which he personally defrauded. Like, he's playing a role in overseeing programs that he personally defrauded. And the Republican Party has found common cause with George Santos in assaulting the social safety net that he has been attempting to defraud his whole life.
I mean, and to your point about larger implications for the Republican Party, his role in sitting in a body that oversees that program, you could draw a parallel to Marjorie Taylor Greene's role in the Homeland Security Committee when she amplifies and creates content that is mainlined into some of the places where domestic violent extremists go and say they go to get their information or disinformation. What is your sense of what, if anything, can be done to sort of raise the alarms about the threat that Republican members represent to the body itself?
Look, if we were to move to expel George Santos, it would send a powerful message. And I worry that the failure to do so is going to enable Mr. Santos to leverage his congressional seat to potentially negotiate a much more favorable plea bargain, which is a privilege unavailable to 99.9% of criminal defendants in America. So as far as I'm concerned, either you expel George Santos or you're enabling him. The Democrats are prepared to expel him, whereas the Republicans continue to enable him. And I know that there are a number of Republicans who have called upon him to resign, but actions matter more than words. It's not enough to call upon George Santos to resign. You have to vote to expel him.
Andrew Weissman, can you speak to whether that is something that prosecutors would have taken into consideration, that he'd be hanging onto his seat as a bargaining chip, and will it work?
I don't think they will take that into consideration. I don't think they have taken that into consideration. I think they will leave that to the political process, and they will look at this as an individual and what did the facts show given and what is the law. I think that whether he may in fact offer to resign in lieu of, some harsher penalty. I mean, I can imagine his lawyers suggesting it should be in lieu of, any sort of conviction, that's not going to fly. It's very rare that the government would consider that. Occasionally, in very, very low-level cases involving, let's say, a letter carrier who does something wrong in terms of stealing mail, it may be part of the resolution that the person has to resign. But in a case involving somebody sitting in Congress, I don't think that's the case, that this will be something where the Justice Department steps in to have that be part of the remedy in this case.
Andrew, also weigh in on the conversation, the comments the Congressman made about the rule of law, that this is now a playbook on the right to instantly come out, impugn the motives of prosecutors whose politics no one has any idea what they are, to impugn the process, and as Michael Steele was saying, immediately engage in the grift.
Yeah, so two points to that. One, I think that this is to Michael's point, which is that I think that the media, as we've talked about in the past, does tend to give play to adjectives and adverbs and epithets, but just saying something's a witch hunt, whether it's Donald Trump or now George or Santos, just saying something's a witch hunt is completely devoid of any facts to say why the government allegations here are wrong, in the same way that Trump saying it's a witch hunt when 9 jurors unanimously found that he sexually assaulted and defamed somebody wantedly is devoid of any factual claim. It's simply a tagline. And I do think that what we're seeing is sort of the failure of institutions to clean house. Although George Santos and Clarence Thomas are obviously wildly different people, and what they have done is completely different, and I'm not comparing them, but I do think that when we see that the Supreme Court is not capable of having a mechanism to police itself, and we're not seeing the House having a mechanism to police itself, when there are things that need to be investigated, it's just simply unacceptable, and it seems such a failure of public servants living by their oath of office. And what they owe all of us, whether you're sitting in the House or whether you're sitting in the highest court of the land, it shouldn't be the Department of Justice that always is the default, or somebody like E. Jean Carroll having the tenacity and guts to do what she did that finally brings accountability. There should be a way to have internal controls that work on a bipartisan level, and I don't think we're seeing that in either institution, whether it's the House or the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Steele, I want to pick up on this parallel, because one of the crimes that I also didn't have his whole name committed to memory, so I'm going to look at it. George Santos was charged with, was this lying on a financial disclosure? It is similar to what has been alleged so far, just in investigative journalism pieces, that there is a failure to disclose, even by the Supreme Court's own rather flimsy ethics code. There's a failure by Clarence Thomas to disclose both the real estate transaction, which is required, the homes, the properties and the home purchase for his mother, as well as the paid tuition for someone he was raising as his own son. Your reflections, and I know you have a lot, about the impact, the sort of rolling, I think of it as, I think Eddie Glaude came up with this term, it is sort of the rolling blackouts of democracy. What happens when one of the two parties doesn't just fail to control itself, it fails to honor its own oath. So then you go into the institution where you're supposed to quote unquote serve, and you're part of its destruction, not just part of its sort of failure to follow the norms and the rules. Those words weren't strong enough. This isn't just norm busting. This is actually destroying and eroding the bodies in which they serve.
Well, they told us up front that's what the plan was, right? This is why we're not surprised by this. They told us, what's the goal? To deconstruct the administrative state. And we saw that process begin almost immediately upon assuming the authority of the White House. When Trump went to the CIA and stood before the wall of the fallen and politicized that moment, politicized their courage and their service. That was a form of deconstruction of that institution, which we then saw play out in the Department of Justice and the various other agencies of government, and then sort of filtered into the way the public began to even look at institutions that they once relied on to protect them and to serve them and to be of value to them. That mistrust, that distrust began to take hold. So very much to what Andrew was saying, you have in one instance an individual who lied in his disclosure about what he was doing, and in the instance of another, he just didn't disclose it. So that's there you are, the twin pillars of this moment, exampled by Santos and Thomas.
It's an unbelievable moment. Congressman Torres, thank you very much for your work and the work of your colleagues in bringing Mr. Santos to all of our attention. He will never be forgotten. I know he's long from gone, but it is an important moment. We're glad to get to talk to you about it. Andrew Weissman, thank you for being part of our show. I think it's the third day in a row. Thank you so much, my friend. A new episode of Andrew's podcast, which he does with our good friend Mary McCord, prosecuting Donald Trump, is out right now. Go listen to it right at 6.